Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. With Bishvat coming up tomorrow night, we thought it would be both fun and insightful to create an in the field Bishvat celebration. None of this just technicalities and talking about import, export, and how it all works in the textbooks. We want to go right into the field and experience it in the way it happens on a daily basis. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce my nephew, Eli Kay, and to welcome my sister, brother-in-law, and other family members. I see that Eli not only has his grandparents from London online, but also his grandparents from Johannesburg, Cliffy and Jessie. So warm welcome to them, and lovely to see everybody. And El, you've been on the front lines for some time, first in the army and now in the field. So set the scene for us a little bit. Why don't you start?
Eli, you need to spotlight Eli.
I will, yeah, I will
spotlight the media as well.
Yeah, I will do. I'm just going. Thanks for mentioning that. The way it will work, of course, as always, you can look at the gallery view, but if you look at speaker view, you'll see Eli Kay being spotlighted in just a moment, and you will also see some of the media that will play during the course of the evening. But Eli, why don't you start by telling us a bit about your background, setting the scene, and particularly charting the journey from South Africa to Israel, why you made Aliyah, and what you were doing in your first years before you've got to where you are now.
All right. Well, I will start at the beginning. I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. And once I finished high school, I decided the time had come to go to Israel. It was something that I'd thought about for many years throughout high school. And once I came to Israel, I got my first taste of agriculture. I was studying in yeshiva before I was drafted to the army, and I was looking for something to do during the vacation, during my holiday between semesters, and I found somehow some ranch, some farm in the middle of nowhere in the south of Israel, and I thought, you know what, don't really connect to the whole concept, but I'll challenge myself. It was a small little sheep farm. And there I started working, and I fell in love. I fell in love with being outside and seeing the sunrise and going to sleep after a full day of work and being outdoors and connecting to the land. And it just, there was a switch. Something happened there that I wasn't aware of. After that, I decided that I was going to stay in Israel. I joined the army. I served in the paratroopers. I was a squad commander, more or less the rank of a sergeant, and the last job that I did in the army was platoon sergeant, which is the rank of
We're losing your sound a little bit, Al. Breaking up.
After I finished the army, I decided to work in, move to a kibbutz and do some work in the field. And
Eli, we've lost the sound. Ella, sorry, I've just muted you for a minute. We've lost your sound. You want to try and move into a position where you might get a better signal? We understand that you're speaking from a kibbutz. There we go. This is all part of the experience. Hopefully we'll get
sometimes
out in the field. Are you back?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did you move positions? Let's see how that goes. You were fine.
No, sometimes the internet in this part of the world decides not to work. It's a routine.
We're with you and can hear you clearly now. Thanks. Go for it.
Brilliant. What was the last thing you heard that I said, just so that I know where to go back to?
About your position in the army with the paratroopers. And what's the picture that's up on the screen now? What's going on over here with the camouflage?
Okay, so once I finished the army, I moved back to an area which I'd served in on the Gaza border. And this is me in my first days working as a farmhand, planting, can tell you what that is. That is celery, planting celery by hand. What actually happened is that I moved to a kibbutz with a group of people that just finished their service, and we all lived together, and we all worked in different agricultural projects in and around the area. And through working as a simple worker, I slowly climbed the ranks, slowly, had a little more time on the tractor, a little more time with responsibility. And from there, I went into a position of management, and that brought me to what I do today, which we'll discuss further on. So that is the story in a nutshell.
Eli, the fact that you've moved towards working on the land, the early Zionists, of course, the big thing for Eastern Europeans in the early days of the Zionist movement was about coming back and working on the land. But of course, today, lots of Israelis have moved away from the land, and very sophisticated culture and the kibbutzim have changed fundamentally. So you are one person who has been drawn back to the land. Why?
Well, from a personal point of view, I can tell you that the connection to the land for me is something that I've always felt very intimately. And when I was in the army and whenever we had to do something very challenging, especially during long marches in training, I would always put a small pebble in my pocket. And I would remind myself that people for thousands and thousands of years, well, not thousands, about 2,000, have been doing everything they possibly could to come back to this place. And the connection is not just a spiritual one, it is a very geographical and physical and historical one. And that connection with the pebbles, with the soil, that is something that has always drawn me, because that is Zionism that is above the political spectrum. It is a connection of a Jewish person in his essence to the land which he came from. And that's what brought me back. But it is definitely a trend that has declined in the last few decades, but we're seeing a renaissance. And it is not something that is completely lost on the Israeli youth of today.
Well, we'll talk about that in a few moments. Let's take a look at this next clip over here. And if you want to highlight it and spotlight it. Tell us about that.
All right. Well, that ties into what my work is today. As of now, as of the last 6 months, I've been working for an organization, it's a non-profit organization called the Shomer HaChadash, which quite literally translates as the new God. It was established in 2004 by the son of a farmer who, to put it very simply, was sick and tired of people stealing from his father's farm, and from there being absolutely no answer from the government or from the police. So he decided within the realm of the law, he was going to take the law into his own hands, and he established a movement which grew into a massive nonprofit, which connects young Jewish Israelis or young Israelis, no matter where they're from, whether they're Druze or Bedouin, to agriculture. First and foremost, we protect farms and we protect lone farmers who have their different, we would call it a ranch, and they're completely isolated. And the part that I deal with is taking young Israelis and connecting them to farmers who need working hands. There's a massive lack of working hands in Israel. Most of the industry relies on migrant workers from Thailand or from Cambodia. And what I do is I connect Israelis to workers, because the way we see it is no Israeli farmer is alone. The clip that we saw is from a project that we recently launched, where we brought over 150 young Israelis who had just finished the army to work with citrus fruit, to pick clementines, to pick oranges. And it is just a massive relief to farmers, because all of a sudden they have a way to try to take all the fruit on the tree and actually get it out there to where it needs to be without paying exorbitant prices. And that clip was from a few days ago. We brought in a new group, mixed boys and girls, all between the ages of 21 to 23. And this is what they've decided to do.
What are the main projects that you're involved in now? We've got citrus fruit. Are you doing anything else? Is this a particular focus at the moment?
So I would say as of now, our main focus is citrus fruit, because that's just how the season works. But we have a range of projects all the way from the southernmost part of the Gaza border, all the way through to the center of Israel up to Netanya, where we deal with pretty much everything. If there's an Israeli farmer who needs a workforce that he can rely on, we will draft a workforce for him. As of now, we have projects in all sorts of, we would call it gidulei sadeh, things that grow from the field, wheat and broccoli and cauliflower. We also deal with medical cannabis research through the Department of Health and the Department of Agriculture. We deal with avocados, citrus fruits, cactuses, anything that we can do to help the Israeli agricultural economy.
But Eli, I presume that these workers are pretty low paid, or they almost kind of voluntary, so it's cheap labor, they're unskilled, there's no special skill that's required to pick a clementine or whatever is there?
Yes and no. I can very, very safely say that very few people go into this industry and work as farmhands for the money. And something that has really moved me since I started working in this project is that Zionism and connection to the land is not lost on the generation as much as we thought. So you don't need to be very skilled to pick fruit off a tree, but you do need to be very, very dedicated, and you have to work very, very, very hard for very little money. And that is something that is just unbelievable to see time after time, that people are still doing this because they want to feel connected.
One of our viewers wants to know what kibbutz you have been on and where it is.
I currently live on a kibbutz called Kibbutz Nirim, Nirim. It is about 2 kilometers from the Gaza border in the southern part of Gaza. It's opposite the city Khan Yunis.
And are there any security concerns living so close to the border of Gaza?
There are a lot. We do have rockets now and then, but it's part of life, and you learn how to read the signs. If you hear a lot of rumbling throughout the day and you hear things shaking, you know to close the window in the bomb shelter before you go to sleep.
When we spoke to you a little bit earlier today and asked you about the strength of your connection, you said that so long as the border is quiet, you'll have an internet connection. But as soon as there's any kind of problems, the Israelis will scramble and block off the internet so that to inhibit communications. So presumably tonight the border is quiet.
Thank God tonight the border is quiet.
And how often does it happen that the border is not quiet?
Could I ask you something else? Here are these young people who've come out of the army, and it's wonderful that they have the opportunity to deregulate, deinstitutionalize, de-armyize, and come onto the land and pick fruit and eat and sleep and be. But what's the structure of their day? And is there the possibility for them to train, to know more about agriculture, about the fruits, about the seasons. Can they take this further and so truly be a resource to these lone farmers and indeed to the industry far past this temporary time when they'll move on to other things? What's the incentive to stay, to grow, to learn?
First of all, what you said about people being released from the army, it's a very important point. These projects ultimately give people who have just come out of the army the ability to reestablish and to reintegrate into civilian life, but it also gives them time to work. I can promise you that working in agriculture gives you a lot of time alone with your thoughts. And it's very fundamental in giving someone that time to be rehabilitated. From my experience, any Israeli worker that comes and starts asking questions and experience and shows some sort of interest beyond the work that they're being told to do, the farmers know very, very well how to, put a pin in that and how to identify that and how to develop those people. From personal experience, I was the one guy in the field who was always asking the farmer, why do we use this seedling and not that? And why do we use that irrigation? And the moment he realized that he had someone who was interested in it, he did everything he possibly could to develop me and to educate me and keep me there. And it's something that I've seen in many different places. There is a future in this. Every Israeli farmer needs another worker who can speak English, speak Hebrew, and understand what he's telling him.
Let's take a look at three of the young people that you've worked with, shall we?
Working in agriculture makes me feel part of our nation's past, present, and future.
What I love about farming is seeing the results of everything you do, whether you plant it or whether you pick it.
Hi, I'm Lior. I'm 22 from Israel. After I finished my service, I thought about what I'm going to do next. So I came here picking avocados. I feel like it's really connecting me to my roots, to my family and to my land, which is amazing, really. It's an amazing experience. I'm really happy I came here. That's all.
What do we have
Working
next?
in
Sorry, this is the one
agriculture.
we've just seen, okay. All right, Eli, I want to move on to technology. I mean, it's a bizarre thing, isn't it? Israel started off with agriculture, which is probably about the most water-intensive kind of industry you can think of, in a land where there was virtually no water. So it was a funny way to start to build a country. Of course, now we've moved into high tech and to lots of other areas as well. But agriculture continues to be, if I understand you correctly, an area of huge, huge technical development. Would you like to talk us through some of the technology which underpins the things that you are doing?
Of course. As a bit of a background, just that we could understand the topic a little bit further and understand why Israel had to develop all of these things in order to survive. Ultimately, in order to grow things, in order to grow anything, you need four basic elements. You need water, you need seedlings, you need soil, and you need climate. Israel, in most of the areas, will either have water and soil, or they'll have soil and climate, or they'll have two or three of the four things, but in no place will they have soil, water, good seedlings, and a good climate. That has forced the Israeli farming industry to develop technologies that will actually allow them to grow crops. And what they've done is, obviously, the climate, we can't control the climate, but the greatest advances have been in soil, water, and seeds. Israel is the #1 seedling developer. What that means is that they develop seedlings and they develop strains through work in laboratories with genetics that can survive the harsh Israeli climate. a farmer who's working in the Negev, in the desert, knows that he can order seedlings that are genetically developed to survive a tough summer, that they won't die. We have developed technologies such as drip irrigation that has been proven to save a lot of water, but ultimately be a lot more effective. And Israel has decided that soil is unimportant. Soil makes no difference. What does that mean? It means that the average farmer, before he will sow crops or prepare new tract of land, he'll take a few blocks of soil, he'll send it off to the lab, and he'll check what different minerals he has in there. And instead of treating the soil, he will treat the water. That means that most of the crops that we're growing receive all of their minerals and all of their nutrition from the water that drips into the soil. And the soil acts as a medium, as a conduit for the roots to suck up the water. But most of the places that we are farming, and the place that I started off in, the Israeli farmers are farming in sand dunes and are creating the most beautiful, beautiful produce from absolutely nothing. And that is thanks to water development and seedling development. There's a clip that you can show that you can see the drip irrigation and another very interesting Israeli technological advance when it comes to the citrus fruit. If you'll
Let me show you this clip.
In this clip, we can see two very simple, very brilliant pieces of Israeli farming technology. The first is drip irrigation. And the second is the art of cutting the bark in the right way so that the fruit comes out a lot sweeter.
So how does that work, El?
All right. So the first very important thing to understand is that almost every agricultural project in the world today uses drip irrigation. What it means is that the way it works is that you'll have a pipe. I should have brought one with me, but we'll just do this. It means what it is that it's a pipe, and every few centimeters or so, there's a small opening that has a catch on top of it that releases a certain amount of water every second as long as there's enough pressure inside the pipe. In the last few months, we've been working in an experiment which has actually proven the effectiveness of drip technology. There were many questions about it, and we have categorically proven that dripping water at a slow but steady rate over longer periods of time allows the water to go into the earth without flooding. It allows for enough oxygen flow. That way, it allows for greater root development, and that allows the plant to take in more nutrients and more minerals from the water that is being dripped into the ground. And all it is a bunch of piping with holes, and that is the beauty and the simplicity of it. Israel does not have a lot of water at all, but we have, through our chutzpah and through our need to save water, we have proven that we can irrigate better by using less. And the second thing that you'll see in that clip is the scratches, the notches on the tree. Israel is the first country to develop what we call, in Hebrew, it's called Clementino or. The literal translation would be light clementines. It is a clementine that is extremely sweet and small and with very few pips. And the way that actually came to be is through seedling development, from getting into the DNA of different strains and really creating something that can survive the really tough climate of Israel, where we won't necessarily have enough cold or have enough rain, or there might be really strong winds. You can never know. And through these technologies, we have developed a fruit that gets sold all over the world. And we also understood by studying trees that by very simply cutting a notch all around the bark, we stop the bark from getting all of the sweet nutrients that are coming through the fibers. And ultimately, all of the water, all of the nutrients and minerals that are coming through the roots goes straight to the branches that produce fruit. And all that means is just cutting a few notches into the bark, and that is it. And that is the beauty of Israeli technology when it comes to farming, is that it's in small practical things that make a huge, huge difference.
There was
With
also
small practical things, you can grow crops in the desert.
there was also a very great bonus, wasn't there, that Israel had a double crop each year, so they were able to get to the European markets before everyone else because their first ripening was earlier than everyone else, and they had, if you pardon the pun, a second bite of the cherry a little bit later in the year. That is almost unique to Israel, isn't it?
It is very unique to Israel. Israel ultimately has two seasons, very hot and then a little bit unpleasant with scattered rains. But ultimately, the Israeli winter is a time where it is the only time when plants in Israel get sunlight and water and have low enough temperatures to stimulate germination. That means that we have summer crops and we're also able to produce crops and pick during the winter. As you said, a double season. And that way, Israel has completely dominated export of fruit and vegetables to the European market and to the Far East.
Can I just ask, if the techniques are so easy, why are other countries not emulating them so much and trying to crowd the market with the same tactics?
Well, could I just say something there, that in our garden outside the window, there is precisely the drip technology that you've described. And the government went berserk about 4 or 5 years ago when it didn't rain enough in the summer and were promising stand pipes, and everybody had to reduce the amount of water they used. And our gardeners came in with this Israeli technique. They're not Jewish or anything, but they said, this is what Israel's developed. It's a tiny drip irrigation system that goes straight to the roots, doesn't waste water, doesn't flood, doesn't use too much water. It's on a timer, no more water than necessary. And we and so many other British gardens are now using, and also greenhouses and so on, and plants under plastic are using the Israel developed drip technology. So in part, that's an answer to your question.
And as a consequence, our clementines and our avocados and the apples that we grow in our garden are far superior to anything that you can produce in Israel.
That's very
I'll
interesting.
take your word for it.
But what about the international market? Are other countries trying to do the same as Israel? And if so, how does that affect competition?
So first of all, it's very important that other countries use these technologies to create a more stable market and to create more competition in the market. That ultimately allows Israeli farmers to really get into their niche and to produce smaller crop yields, but to hike up the prices, which the Israeli farmers are very good at doing. But a lot of it is based on long-standing contracts, overseas contracts. And I would say that a lot of the Israeli seed development companies really have the monopoly. We're streets ahead of the biggest European competitors. And that always gives us the edge, is that somehow we always manage to have better crop yields. And many mistakes that have been made in other parts of the world haven't been repeated in Israel. Most farming in the world operates off a system called monoculture, where they'll farm the same tract of land over and over and over again with the same crop that ultimately depletes the land and causes erosion. Whereas in Israel, you're not really going to erode a sand dune. And second of all, they're very aware of rotating their crops. And also every 7 years in Israel, ultimately you have a shmita. You're not allowed to work the land, and many agricultural companies take that very seriously. And that resting of the land allows us to have greater yields in future years.
Eli, I want to move on to Bishvat. The majority of Israelis today are no longer involved with the land. So in what way is Tu B'Shvat a meaningful festival now in Israel?
It's interesting that you ask that, because Israel at large is actually quite a secular society. And many of the Chagim are not celebrated, especially in the part of the world that I live in, which is very much dominated by very secular kibbutzim. Tu B'Shvat is the one Chag, is the one Jewish holiday of the year that is very, very deep in Israeli society. I think number one, that although most Israelis are not connected with the land, it is something that's very intrinsic to Israeli history, and it's something that most people are aware of, that the forefathers of modern Zionism started literally by creating roots. And that's something that has carried on through. And I think it is the Chag of Tu B'Shvat is something that reminds us that life is a lot bigger and the world is a lot bigger than the concrete jungles that we live in and the day-to-day life. It reminds us that we are inherently connected with nature. And I think every society is always very thirsty for a day like that, a day where we take fruit and we eat them and we talk about our connection to nature. And I think Israeli society has really taken Tu B'Shvat to that sort of place. It's a reminder how we are so deeply dependent on nature and what it gives us.
In the West, in the diaspora, Tu B'Shvat has now become synonymous with, or has become a springboard for ecological considerations. You know, it's the expression of saving nature, of climate change, etc. Where is Israel in regard to those broader concepts of ecological conservation?
Israel is in a state of constant, I wouldn't say war, but constant deliberation between conservation and development. Ultimately, it's a very small country, and the remaining nature that we have, or that we have rehabilitated, we are trying our utmost to save and to conserve. But ultimately, at the same time, it is a country that needs to develop and needs to build greater cities and developments and settlements, especially in the Negev area, which is one of the last areas that we have conserved. But relating to what you said earlier about Tu B'Shvat heralding spring and being sort of a benchmark for the season, Tu B'Shvat in Israel heralds the most beautiful season. Israel doesn't really have a spring, but it's got a very beautiful end to the winter. In the south, these months, the middle of January, February, and until the middle of March are known as Darom Adom, the southern south. The entire Israel, especially the southern region that I live in, starts to blossom with the most beautiful poppies and kalaniot, which are another red flower, but for the life of me, I can't remember the name in English. And there is an unbelievable blossoming that happens throughout the country. And Tu B'Shvat is really the benchmark for that. When Tu B'Shvat comes, you know that if you go for a walk in the fields, you'll start to see wildflowers. You'll start to see the blossoms on the trees that have just been picked. And if you don't see these things, and this year it was a bit of a sketchy one. We hadn't seen anything. We hadn't seen any flowers. If you don't see anything by the time Tu B'Shvat comes, you know that something's very wrong. But thank God that the flowers in the last week have started blossoming. There's bees in the fields, which is unpleasant, but it's important. And Tu B'Shvat really, really shows that it's the birthday for nature. In Israel, on Tu B'Shvat, nature really comes into its best.
For some people, it's summer all year round. I mean, look at this guy, your cousin in Miami. Hi, Mayor.
He's hiding himself.
He's on his.
Eli, just tell us about how Tu B'Shvat is celebrated on the kibbutz and on the farm. What happens there?
Well, I can tell you what happened on this kibbutz a few hours ago. All of the young people in the kibbutz hopped into a big trailer that was attached to a tractor, and they had Tu B'Shvat songs blasting at full volume, And they went around the kibbutz giving out fruit to people and wishing everyone Chag Tu Bishvat Sameach, a happy Tu Bishvat. And on a kibbutz like this, which is a real old school Shomer HaTzair agricultural kibbutz, it's very clear here that this is our lifeline. But it's not just our lifeline. Israel, despite having a strong military, heavily relies on farmers to guard the lands. Most of our borderlands, most of our security buffer lands. I'm not talking about the West Bank, but I'm talking about everything that is close to our borders is agricultural farmland. And that is our lifeline. That is what ultimately keeps us here. So in a border community like this, Tu Bishvat is our Chag in many senses. It's our day.
Well, what a journey you have taken from Johannesburg, South Africa, in a cozy, comfortable Jewish environment, all the way back to the land in Israel. It's a heck of a journey, and it's really fascinating to hear the extent of your knowledge and your engagement. It's really, really special. We're going to open to questions now, and if anybody would like to ask Eli anything, please do just unmute and ask whatever you'd like.
Hi, El.
Hi.
What's Tu Bishvat music?
There's the classic, Tu Bishvat Sameach, Chag Leilanot. That's the
I thought
basic.
that was Hanukkah. I think they just put the name of the holiday in, and they just use that across the board, universal.
Yeah, I think they have a very basic template for Israeli folk songs. They just play with the lyrics.
What else? Which other songs?
To be honest, I wasn't really with them because I wasn't on the tractor. I was I was in the office working, but
right.
I heard it in the background.
Okay, you're off the hook.
Yeah.
Are there any nice customs that we could take away from this and do at home? The tractor idea is great. Anything else?
There's a few things that I would suggest. Number one is to use the day to really think about what it means to have a connection with nature. I'm not talking about being a hippie and going out into the field and hugging trees, but there is a saying in Judaism that Ki Adam etz hasadeh, a man is like the tree of the field. There are many things that we can learn from a tree that we can apply to our lives, and something that is very important for me is the thought that if you have strong roots, you might experience a storm, you might have a few broken branches, whatever it may be, but the tree remains intact. And I think that's something that everyone could take into their own life. And also from a more Hasidic or Kabbalistic perspective, it often says in Kabbalah and Hasidut that there is an intrinsic connection between nature and Elokim, the godly source that continues to cause this world to exist. And through searching into nature and through seeing how things work almost by clockwork, and things are so exact and so sensitive to so many different things, it really makes you think that there's more to this world, and that we are ultimately part of a much, much bigger ecosystem here, which is something that is very easy to forget. And it's also a great time to eat fruit and, good nutrition. So take from that whatever you want.
Anyone else?
I'd just like to say thank you, Eli. It's Andrew here. Hi. Eli, I remember you were a little boy when you used to visit South Hampstead Synagogue. You're all grown up now.
I'm trying my best.
It's lovely to see
Still got the quiff.
I don't have any questions. I'd just like to thank you, and I'm going to tomorrow walk on the grass bare feet and see if that helps me to connect to the land. And May Levine, you can be walking on the beach in your bare feet. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Ellie, what time do you normally wake up in the mornings there? And what time do you normally finish? I mean, it's amazing work that you and your team do. It's incredible. I mean, we're so proud of you. As Andrew said, we remember you as a young boy, young child, and now you've become a man and grown up and sharing with us this incredible story that you're doing. It's incredible. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Well, first of all, just to take you through the day very basically, we start work with the sunrise, so that it sort of depends on the season. But a typical day would be to wake up at around 5, leave the house at around 5:30, get to the field, at around 6 o'clock, and make sure that all the workers are there. Hopefully all the tractors are working and get everyone where they need to be. If we're picking, then the day is usually finished by 3 or 4. And if we're in the fields laying irrigation or weeding or doing, whatever work comes with that, the day starts with the sunrise and ends with the sunset.
In other words, Izzy, it's not for you.
That's not. I used to work on a farm.
But not anymore.
Not anymore.
Izzy, in the winter time in England, the sun doesn't rise until 9:30. That's just about the right time to work.
He has a point.
The wrong place to work in agriculture then.
Your grandpa has a good sense of humor.
That he does.
He's the best. You're very lucky to have grandparents like them. Really.
Right, let's move on.
Can I just say, talking about grandparents, my parents, one of my parents at least, actually, her parents also were on a farm, grew up on a farm, or owned a farm or something. Mum, is that right? Can you tell us more about that? You can leave the pigs out of it.
So yeah, my paternal grandfather was a farmer. He farmed bees, he farmed sheep and cows. And my father was a farmer for many years. But I think it's more about what Ellie has really described very beautifully and sensitively. It's about the connection to
nature.
Well, it's other parts of the world that aren't human. And we are deaf and blind to those very often in our urban lives. And so it's a dimension of humanity, of God's world, that we become much more sensitive to. And as Ellie says, we realize that, yes, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there's an animal and a plant and a world out there of constellations to which we must pay attention to enrich both the world and ourselves as sentient human beings.
It's true.
Very true.
What are the stress points, Ellie? It sounds so glorious, but your management role and things can go wrong, no doubt, with him. Having to send people to different places, managing rotas, people not being able to turn up for work. In that schedule you described from sunrise to sunset, where are the ouch points?
It is an extremely stressful job. As glorious as it is, and as wonderful as it sounds to connect to the earth, I can promise you, no matter how Zionistically inclined you are, when you start work at 6 and your break's at 11 o'clock, and it's only 9 a.m. and you are sweating and you are tired and you are sore, there's nothing romantic about that. And that is ultimately the reality. It is hard work. And I can tell you from the management side of things, I sort of missed the days where I was picking and laying irrigation and I would go home and the problems would remain at home. But it is definitely, it's an area that keeps you on your toes. because as I said to you last week, I wanted to send you in the media, and then we had 2 days of rain, and I could not send a single worker out into the field. And sometimes, you know, people will go into quarantine, and then I don't have a team, and I promised the farmer a team of workers. It is very dynamic, but it's also very, very satisfying. We're talking here about 200 workers in 5 different places, so it comes with its challenges.
Eli, are you short of workers?
I'm not short of workers. Certain places are difficult to draft workers to. For example, all of the projects that we run in the south, anyone who's already interested in working in agriculture is here, and they've moved to the south, and this is what we're looking for. When we started setting up programs in the Tel Aviv area, we had a really, really tough time drafting workforce because people who live in that area don't want to work in agriculture, and those that have moved either to the far north or to the south. But there isn't a shortage of Israeli workers, especially due to Corona. I mean, you get to be out of the house every day without a mask and work in open fields. It's fantastic.
Yes, there's not many jobs these days that you can do without a mask.
Okay, a question from Rachel Emuna.
What is different in Israel to Bishvat or Yom Ha'atzmaut?
What is different, or which one is more joyous?
What is more joyous in Israel to Bishvat or Yom Ha'atzmaut?
Yom Ha'atzmaut is definitely a far more vibrant and outgoing celebration. It is a lot more joyous. I think the joy of Tu B'Shvat in Israel is, I think I would call it more low-key. It is not something that you can see so clearly. Yom Ha'atzmaut is definitely a much bigger party.
I think if no one has any further questions, then we will leave with the joy of everything that's been said. We've got a great taste for Tu B'Shvat in our mouths. Eli, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
You're an expert already, and God willing, you're going to climb further and further in everything you turn your hand to. We're all proud of you as a community and family, and you've really enriched our insight and our appetite for this Tu B'Shvat. We thought it would be Tu B'Shvat in lockdown, but I think we feel like we're outside with you and feeling the atmosphere more than ever before. So thank you very, very much.
You know what else? Can I just say, you know, there are groups of kids, please God, when Corona goes, and the air corridors and travel corridors have been opened once again. Eli, amongst others, takes groups of kids to Israel. And the focus is quite a lot on sad things. I wonder if there's a connection to be made between the groups, certainly from South Hampstead, and you. And perhaps you could invite them to share some of your life and what you do, and explain in greater detail the fascinating things that you've explained to us tonight, because that's an aspect that they haven't experienced quite in this way. And that would be extremely special, to come to the kibbutz, to see and smell and hear all about it and understand a bit more about the part that plays in the life of Israel.
That is definitely something worth discussing, and we have existing infrastructure that can enable that.
Thank you for being with us as always.
Night.
Coming up tomorrow night.